Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Takata, and I am the technical evangelist for Adobe ColdFusion. And today, I'm going to be talking about the road to Fortuna. So the next version of Adobe ColdFusion, currently codenamed Fortuna, but most likely to be called CF 2023 because we're not very creative, is coming out later this year. And I'm going to be talking about what's coming, some of the items that are in it. But before I do that, I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about some of the programs that we're currently running to help the community help us develop this product. So starting late last year, we actually had an Alpha 1 release, an internal alpha, where we accepted people to a program and had them testing out a limited feature set. It didn't actually have all of the features available, but it had about 60% of them. And as of last week, we've actually released Alpha 2, which added a couple more features, and it's pretty much feature complete. It's pretty close. Coming out, I believe, in mid-March, we are actually going to be closing the alpha down and opening up a public beta. And the public beta is essentially the program. It's CF 2023 in beta form for all of you to test. And it's really, really important to us that we get this into people's hands, that we get people using it, especially as some of the features are in places that not a lot of you have played in before. And they're actually even maybe a little bit new to us. For example, all of the Google Cloud Platform features that we're adding to ColdFusion. I am not a Google guy at all. In fact, I'm not even much of an AWS person. Before I joined the ColdFusion team at Adobe, I was actually an Azure guy. And so on the Google front, I'm learning. But if there's folks that are currently experienced in Google and are using Firestore and their bucket systems and all that, it will definitely be very helpful to have you come in, be part of that beta. It's actually going to be an open beta, so there's no limit on the number of people. I don't think we're going to have any kind of lockdown on communication, so we'll be able to talk kind of anywhere, although we will prefer that bugs are mostly kept to the forums just so that we can track them and get them into our systems as much as possible. So having said that, that's coming. Keep an eye out on that. Hopefully you're following me on LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm going to announce it, or you're on the CFML Slack, where I'll also announce it, since I'm sort of everywhere all at once. So that was my introduction. And I already talked about the new version of Adobe ColdFusion, but when is it going to come out? So it is scheduled to release at the end of the first half of 2023. Now, what does that mean in English? So Adobe's year starts December 1 of the previous year. So go 6 months forward to that. Sometime between December 1st and that 6-month period is when it's going to release. Now, obviously, we're already most of the way through February, so we're probably looking at about June or July, right in that area, if nothing catastrophic or crazy happens. So fingers crossed. What's coming? All right, so this is what is in the box. We've got, as I mentioned, a finish to our cloud story. So we're already in AWS. We've got a lot of features in the Amazon space. We also have a fair number of features in Azure, and now we are adding similar features to GCP. We're adding a central configuration server, and I'm going to go through all of these, by the way, in detail as we go in, and I'm also going to show some code samples as well. Central configuration server helps not really developers, but it helps administrators to not be quite as nervous and scared with updates and changes to your ColdFusion installs. Like, you've got 20, 30 servers out there and you need to make a change. Well, kind of sucks to do that right now. It's a little bit hard. It's hard to apply that. But then also, if you apply it and you zig instead of zagging, then you have to undo that, and that can also be a bear. So this server component actually will help you get around that. Now, I'll talk a little bit in detail about what that does. We're also adding single sign-on integration for the administrator. So what that means is, in the past, even if you were using SAML for like your applications and you're part of a big corporation, like Adobe, for example, we use Okta for our SSO. If you had CF 2021 running, you couldn't actually use SSO to control your logins for administrator. You have to actually have another set of passwords, which is annoying and also leads to very insecure ways of working, like having one password for everyone. Not that anybody here has ever done that. Uh, so now you're going to be able to use either SAML or LDAP to control that, including groups. And I'll talk a little bit about that. We are completely replacing the PDF engine. This is a big deal. We have used the WebKit engine for a really long time to generate PDFs, and it is very long in the tooth, unfortunately. It's basically almost extinct in terms of what features it supports. It didn't keep up with all the various CSS and all that. And by the way, all of these things that I'm talking about right now, if you wanted to try them out, as I mentioned earlier, we do have an alpha program and we have some openings there still. So if you are interested in downloading and trying some of this out, please let me know at the end of my talk and I will send you an invite. Now, slightly less sexy and exciting, but fully as important are the library updates. These are all the things behind the scenes, like the version of Java, the version of Solr, the version of Hibernate. We have a number of library updates that are happening behind the scenes in the new version, some of which have caused our developers an obscene amount of headaches. The Java update probably took 4 months of like very, very late nights for the whole team to get running. It was very ugly to update. And this one is really near and dear to my heart. We are adding native GraphQL querying support to ColdFusion. So if you've never heard of GraphQL, I'm going to give you a little bit of a primer on what it is. We are adding the ability to natively query endpoints with GraphQL. Now, this means we are not, in this version, giving you the opportunity to open up your ColdFusion server as a GraphQL endpoint, primarily because it's kind of a bear to do that right now. We didn't want to just, plop Apollo server into our release and have you try and build out these huge, ugly, nasty, XML and JSON-based schemas when we could potentially do something better and actually maybe shortcut that way, do some auto detection, build the schemas for you, that kind of thing. So we know that some of that technology is out there, and we're currently researching how to do that, potentially in an update mid-year, potentially in the next version of Adobe ColdFusion. We're not really sure. So that would be 2025. Dozens of bugs fixed. That's actually wrong. It's hundreds of bugs. I think the count was 224 last time I checked. Bugs are being fixed in this version. So a lot of work in that side of things. A full list will be released of all the bugs. It's extensive. You can read it at night when you're trying to go to sleep. And of course, core support will be extended to 2028, extended support to 2029. And of course, that will be TBD in terms of putting it onto the website, because, spoiler alert, it's not out yet. So once it comes out, then it will come out. And by the way, this is a common myth, and it's one that's we've been trying to dislodge, and it's very difficult to dislodge. People will go to our end of life matrix and see that 2029 or 2028 is the end of core support for ColdFusion, and they panic and say, oh no, it's 2023, in 6 years there's not going to be ColdFusion anymore. ColdFusion is not going to be supported anymore. Oh my gosh, panic. That's not what that means, right? We literally can't put a support for a product that doesn't exist yet, and ColdFusion 2023 doesn't exist yet, technically, and neither does 2025, 2027, but they are being planned. Trust me, I'm in those meetings. They're late and early, like 2:30 in the morning. I'm there, believe me. All right, so what's coming in Google Cloud? Again, Google Cloud to me is somewhat new, but for those of you that are familiar with it, it's got a lot of very similar features to the other clouds. For example, storage services, right? So you've got buckets, and we are going to give you some, native hooks, some functions inside of ColdFusion that, first of all, one of the important things to note here is one of the things that you'll be able to do, just like in the other clouds, is you'll be able to create an authentication object to then be able to iterate against inside of your code. And this is actually important if, for example, you have some maybe junior developers who you don't want to have like full access to the administrator, or maybe you don't want them to have access to your authentication keys. Whatever that happens to be, you can actually create an object inside of administrator and then give them the name of that object to then iterate against, and then you can run a variety of functions against it. We have that already for Azure. We have that already for AWS inside of the administrator, and we will continue on in that same sort of pattern here for Google Cloud. And this is also kind of part of our multi-cloud approach, where all you have to do at that point is then change that that object to point to a different cloud, change the authentication scheme, and for the most part, a bucket is a bucket is a bucket. Of course, some things are a little bit different across the clouds. There's things like caching that might be a little bit different. So there is a little bit of change that you'll have to do. But for the most part, it won't be, a 0 to 100 refactor. And that's what we're trying to do, is save you a little bit of time. So in storage services, as you can see, we have the full CRUD lifecycle there. We're going to do support. Change tracking is going to be available through ColdFusion, and disaster recovery. So backup and all that will also be controllable. Firestore is a database. It's a document database in Google Cloud. And again, all of the things you might be expecting inside of support for something like Firestore, CredOps, being able to query transactions, but then also the admin UI that I mentioned before, and also we're exposing the admin API functions for that as well. So we're adding new features so you'll be able to, for example, to set up your admin with a script using the admin API that will set up a Firestore endpoint, something like that. PubSub, so publish, subscribe, CRUD operations, things like topics, schemas, snapshots. If you're not familiar with what PubSub is, it's essentially the ability for messaging between applications. So not necessarily, oh, I'm sending Rick a DM on Slack, not that kind of messaging, but when one application or one micro app has an event that happens, you can then throw it into PubSub, and it can do things like queuing. This allows you to do very, very high load systems, so somewhat asynchronously, without getting bogged up and having timeouts and doing all that. And you can like spread the load here. It's very, very efficient. It's a very powerful way of doing systems. And essentially it works by having subscriptions to a particular topic. And we'll be having, by the way, a demo series coming up probably in about June or so that will go into some demos of this stuff. But of course, you can also go to Google and find out, because these things are not ColdFusion specific. These are actually features and functionality that are already in Google Cloud that we're just allowing you to use using native ColdFusion stuff. We're also adding their Cloud SQL suite, which is MySQL, Postgres, Microsoft SQL, all that, and they've got some native mem stores in the cloud, Redis and Memcached, for you to use if you need to do that as well. All right, central config server. This one is a big deal, and this one was something that me and the previous PM kind of came up with after many late nights of drinking. Essentially, what this is designed to do is reduce the stress on a ColdFusion administrator. So this isn't necessarily something that the programmers and developers of the world are gonna get all excited about. This is like the DevOps folks, the administrators, the server folks, who you rely on to set up your servers and to update them and to make sure that everything's running. This is going to support them. And as you can see, you have the ability to do syncing of the settings across all of your servers. So what does that mean? That means that you could set up a server exactly the way that you want. So you'd have one server running someplace, you set it up, you test it, you do everything you need to do. Then you can duplicate that setup to n number of servers across your network. That's what this can do. You can also assign environments to each of the servers. So for example, you can designate this server is staging, this server is development, this server is production, and that detail can then be detected inside of ColdFusion, which allows you to use, ColdFusion variables inside of your inside of your application .cfc to make sure that you're pulling from the correct places as far as DSNs, or you can have that environment set up inside of the CCS to say, if it's a production server, these are the DSNs with these names. If it's a staging server, these are the DSNs, right? So that allows you, for example, to even swap what the environment is on something. If you want to temporarily take a server and go from dev to staging, for example, and maybe you have a staging environment that's a mirror of your production, you can go ahead and do that. And while it's in that mode, it'll be pulling from those databases. Then you set it back. And that's all done from the administration side, including using an admin API. So you could even script this. You could create your own system to control this. It's very, very powerful. Obviously, we've got multi-clustering support if you've got a really big complex setup. Versioning, and this is kind of the big deal here. When you make a change, you want to be able to back out of that change when it's something as important as a server, right? Because who knows? Maybe you're adding some feature to like your Java garbage collection, something along those lines, and it blows everything up, right? Well, then what do? Like, if the server's still up enough to get to the administrator, you could potentially log in and change that and, maybe restart the server, whatever. But what if you have to do it to 30 servers? What if the server's down because of the change that you made? You're kind of hosed. This system will allow you to back those changes back out using this central point. So as long as you've got one server up running CCS and that's your controller, and as long as that stays up, you're good to go. There's also a CLI that's related to this. So you can do all of this through scripting, through SSH if you want. There's an auto discovery feature that lets you discover which servers are out there. So this is really powerful and a really, really big deal. Very complex, but again, it's not something a programmer might necessarily be excited about, other than the DevOps people won't try and avoid you in the hallways as much anymore as they might now. CFadmin SSO support. This one is a big deal for big companies that use SSO, because one of the complaints that I hear a lot about from bigger companies, universities, places like that, is adding ColdFusion adds load to administrators, security people, etc., because there's no way to control access to the server. And that's a pretty big deal. If you can get in there, you can wreak havoc, right? So, and yeah, it's just one more password, but it's always one more password, right? Everything that you add is one more password. And so we had been asked, could you add the ability not just to incorporate SSO, but groups, so that you could have an LDAP group, for example, have particular access to just some parts of the administrator. Maybe you don't want them having access to the clustering, right? Oh, Charlie's here. Hey, Charlie. And Charlie knows a lot about this feature, by the way. Oh, is there a chat? Oh, there is a chat. Look at this. I was not actually paying attention to that. Right. So so the SSO support includes some new admin APIs as well, which is, again, a really powerful and useful feature for folks to script out. If you've got a CI/CD and you're setting things up, this is also really useful. And again, it's LDAP and SAML for SSO. As I mentioned before, HTML to PDF engine upgrade. And it's literally, it's not even an upgrade, it's it's ripping the motor out of your car and putting in a twin turbo V8. This is a really, really big upgrade. If a lot of folks have been using ColdFusion for a really long time, might remember, the old way of doing ColdFusion with PDF was, you use CF document, you change the type to PDF, and that's how you convert your HTML to PDF. And then we released HTML to PDF and CF PDF and all that. And for a while it was great. It kind of short-circuited, that whole thing. It made the workflow a little bit better, but then it stopped working so well. We started getting pages that had maybe more complex layout. They weren't just tables. They weren't just tables and images, right? Maybe they were using weird images like SVGs, and they wouldn't come across. And so you started getting these really poor outcomes, and so people stopped using it. And now a lot of people just don't even use HTML to PDF, or they use some external other engine, or they went back to using CF document. So now you can use it again. And these are some of the things that it supports. So, all the newest versions of CSS, anything that's in HTML5 plus, all the good stuff. Flex, it supports Flex, it supports CSS Grid, it supports SVGs really, really well. So that's pretty important. SVGs are a vector style of imaging that can scale, which is also very important. If you've got a PDF, you might be printing it. You might be printing it real big. Who knows? We don't know. So if you were using, GIFs or JPEGs before that maybe didn't have a high enough resolution, and you try to print them, it didn't turn out so good, right? Or if they were on a big screen and they'd get all pixelated when you tried to zip them. So that's something. Page breaks, fonts, form elements, all of these things are now supported properly. Like, there were hacks to get most of the stuff to actually work. Some of them work most of the time, part of the time, but now they'll work all the time. And this is actually a funny one. This one I wasn't really aware of as a limitation of the old engine, but apparently if you had big enough HTML files, they would actually crash the old engine. And it wasn't that big of a limit. If I'm remembering correctly, it was something like, I don't know, 85 megs or 120 megs. Now, 120 megs of text is a lot of text. But we had people that were going over that. Like Boeing, for example, has these enormous, just giant manuals, right? They build planes for heaven's sake. So there are these huge manuals, and they would they'd blow up. They couldn't take it. So now the limit is something stratospheric, and even those don't even begin to touch the limit. I'm sure there's still some limit, but it's probably some inane amount, like 64,000 gigs or something crazy. Don't quote me on that. I don't know what the actual limit is. And then audio and video embedding. So that was, again, something that was a limitation, but has become fairly popular. PDFs kind of went from the way you print things to the way you create documents for people to download and engage with on a variety of platforms. And that includes things like video. Now, we still haven't figured out how to print a video and have it run on paper, but I'm sure someone's working on that. Okay, so this is an example, and hopefully everyone can see this okay. This is an example of the difference between what the old engine would do and what the new engine would do. So here on the left, we have someone has created an invoice using HTML, and that's what it looks like in Chrome on your browser. Everything lines up perfectly. All of the lines are there. There's nothing overlapping. Things are in columns, right? Looks like an invoice, and it's great. If you were to try and take that and use the current, 2021 version of the PDF engine, this middle thing is what you would end up getting. I mean, ignore the, I don't even know why I have a demo with the stupid watermark. Ignoring the watermark, you'll notice everything's all kind of not lined up, right? Like this should be a line straight down the side, and this is like the text is overlapping. It just looks bad, looks unprofessional. And, to be fair, no one would want to use that. Why would you want to have your end user customer see an invoice that looks like that, right? So people found other ways to render this as a PDF. Now here on the right, we have the new engine rendering the exact same code that's on the left as a PDF. And you can see there's, maybe the fonts are a tiny bit different just because of the way that they're being interpreted by the engine. So like the darkness and the roundness of the fonts is a little tiny bit different. So I didn't just take this thing over here and copy it over. I'm not that sneaky. But as you can see, everything looks really good. It's lined up really well and it works. Okay. Library updates. By the way, did anybody have any questions about that one? I think I could have a little bit more demo if anyone wanted to see it, but maybe we can do it later. Yeah,
I did have one question. So for places that are now, because the PDF engine hasn't been touched in, let's just say, 15 years. For places that now depend on the bugs and the nuances of the existing engine, do you have like a legacy mode or any way to help them update or anything like that as they move to the new engine?
Yes. So let me talk about that a little bit. You can choose to use the old engine. It's in the administrator. However, if you set that setting, it actually flies me out and I stand over you like this while you use it. So it's a little bit of a, no, I'm just kidding. Yes, there absolutely is a legacy mode. You can choose the engine to be 1.0 or 2.0. We continue, the licensing has not gone away on the WebKit stuff. So it is still in there. It's just when you, and by the way, it's per server. So if you, for example, if you want to move over, right, you could potentially use the central configuration server to set up a server to be a duplicate of the one that you're currently using to generate your PDFs and just change the engine and try them out and see what happens, see if it works. And then if that works, you can go ahead and then change the engine to 2.0 on the other one. So yeah, absolutely. We're still giving you the option to use the old version in case there's something about the new one that doesn't work quite the way that you're expecting it to.
I'm more thinking of a place where, where you upgrade the server and then you've got developers that have to go like report by report to modify them and change it. So
Gotcha. Yeah.
It's not something that you can set like in the application CFC or something like that though, right?
Yes. So you can, in the application CFC, you can actually say version blah, blah, blah. And then that application will run as that version. There is also a global that you can set for the entire server. So it's both. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah. It's definitely up there. And I should also say in my testing, I actually have not seen the places I've seen the difference have been in places where I would never have released the thing in production using HTML to PDF. When I use CF, content or something like that, CF document, I mean, when I use that to move over to PDF, I just really haven't seen that many, that like it still works that kind of same way as it did before. So, yeah, so hopefully there's a minimal amount of changes that have to happen code-wise, but yes, you can set all of the variety of things on an application level if you wanted to do that. And then the one thing with that is if you set it in your application.cfc, that overrides the server stuff. And then if you had to change that back, you can't control it using CCS. You would have to actually use it. You'd have to change it in the code. So that's the one drawback of doing it that way. Anybody, any other questions on that? Okay, I'm going to go on. Library update. So we are going to Java 17. which, as mentioned before, was an absolute headache because so many things broke when moving over to it. And having talked with some of the Lucy folks, I know it's been a nightmare for them as well on their side. So they are and they have I think they have a working version. If someone happens to know, you can correct me here, but it's not currently up at 17, and they're going to I might be thinking actually of Ortus now, because Ortus also was thinking of trying to move over to 17, but they don't want two separate versions existing at once because things will break horribly in terrible ways. Solar is moving to 8.9 if you're using that. And Hibernate, which I know all of you use for ORM. Crickets. Anybody here use ORM?
Actually, I use it all the time.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah.
I got one. Yes. No, it's really funny. I joke because I didn't really even interact with ORM for a very, very, very long time until I went to UC Davis, and the chancellor's office over there has their own system built up. It's a custom system, and it's running all on ORM. And it's beautiful, like it's crazy good. But I didn't know what the hell I was looking at, right? Because if you don't know about ORM and you see the way that they're pulling data, it's like magic, right? Like where's the query? It's like, well, it's object relational magic. Anyway, so we're updating that as well. Okay, GraphQL. Who here is familiar with GraphQL? Raise your hands. Got one. Okay. Two. Okay. I know Charlie knows. I'm pretty sure. So, and John. Okay. So, and Rick. Okay. We've got some people. So I'm just going to really quick go over what GraphQL is, and what we're going to be supporting. So, as you all know, with APIs, things started with SOAP, right, which was XML based, and then they moved over to RESTful endpoints, which for the most part return JSON, right? But the limitations of something like REST are that you get back from it what that endpoint is designed to do, with maybe a little bit of filtering. Like, so for example, you can say, okay, give me back, all contacts, or if I put in an ID, give me the contact with that ID, right? You can't really easily say, give me all contacts that start with the letter J, unless there's an endpoint that's designed to take in the letter J, and that's the way that you're going to pull it back, right? So what GraphQL lets you do is, just like REST, there's an endpoint that you point at, but instead of either just asking for everything back or putting in like a little bit of data, like a parameter or two, you can actually send a query to that endpoint. And what that query is capable of doing is actually designed using a schema on the server side. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where we're not allowing you quite yet to expose any ColdFusion data sets as GraphQL, because these schemas can be extremely complex. And what we're doing, basically what GraphQL does is it takes kind of that complexity and puts it all in the server, allowing you to come in and be able to query very powerfully a set of data. And I'm going to show you some code, and once you kind of see it, it'll make a little bit more sense. One of the best things about GraphQL, though, is if you're a programmer and developer and you have any kind of comfort with JSON, it's going to look really familiar for you, because unlike almost every other querying language, the query itself looks just like the return. So essentially, you're sending some JSON and saying, I would like the following things maybe filtered in this manner. And then what comes back are those things filtered in that manner in JSON. Okay. So what are we going to give you? Well, we're going to start off by giving you the ability to, connect to GraphQL endpoints and create authentication objects inside of either admin or in the code. You can do it either way, just like you can with some of the cloud features that we have. And then execute against that authentication object to pull back data or change data, which is called a mutation. And that's what queries and mutations are: either getting data back in a variety of forms and formats, or a mutation is creation, deletion, or an update, right? So they separate that out as two kind of separate capabilities. We're going to give you the ability to pass arguments, to pass in variables. So for example, if you've got a form and that form is a search, and oh, nice. Yeah, John just mentioned. So there was kind of a GraphQL RESTful called JSON API, which I have heard of, and it's almost there. And probably I would actually guess that the folks that built GraphQL, which is Facebook, if you use Facebook, you're using GraphQL every single day. I'm sure they were aware of JSON API, and it probably informed a lot of their design decisions. So you'll be able to pass variables, aliases, fragments, which is kind of neat. Fragments are, you can build little pieces of queries, so they're reusable objects. So it's kind of the DRY concept. Don't repeat yourself, and you can use that to build out really complex systems of queries and reuse portions of it and change them really easily, and all that, be really efficient. Operation names, subscriptions. This one is, it's like, oh, it's just one item. This is a big one. So subscriptions essentially work by connecting over WebSockets, which some of you may be familiar with. Giancarlo has he does a lot of talks on using WebSockets in ColdFusion. Obviously, we have WebSockets built into ColdFusion, but they can be, I don't know, a little bit complicated if you don't know what you're doing. I mean, I think I've been to his talk like 3 times, and I kind of know how to set one up. But essentially, what GraphQL lets you do, and again, the server has to support this, it has to be part of the schema, etc. But you can subscribe to a particular query, and that query, anytime that data changes inside of that query, it'll actually go and send the data back across. Now, of course, because ColdFusion is server side, that doesn't mean that, oh, it's going to pop up in your UI. You have to have some kind of UI that is updating that way. But you can, for example, trigger like a query update. You can write something to a page. You can write something to a database that's being pulled somewhere else. Lots and lots of different options out there. And then, of course, caching. And if you want to learn more about GraphQL, which I definitely recommend that you do, I would go to graphql.org/learn. There's a whole bunch of information on there, and we are using their spec directly to design our stuff. So anyone who knows GraphQL will be able to come in, install ColdFusion, and use GraphQL right away, which is one of the reasons that we're doing it. I truly believe it's the future when it comes to querying stuff. And by the way, on the subscription stuff, one fun thing, if you've ever been in a Facebook like live thing and you've seen the little thumbs up and the little hearts sort of popping up as people use them, that's actually that's a GraphQL subscription. And what's happening there is, as those are updated, it's driving that directly into the browser using GraphQL. So kind of a neat little thing. Now, of course, again, like that's a tie-in between, I believe it's React and they've got a WebSocket connector through to GraphQL. So that's kind of how they're doing that. So you'd have to set something up similar. Okay, I mentioned already public alpha 1, which is currently live. Oh, you know what? I'm going to show you a little bit of GraphQL. Let me do that, because I think that is sort of fun. So let me start here. So some of you who have been watching my videos might have said, but Mark, I remember when you first joined the team over there, you did a talk on GraphQL using ColdFusion, and that was a long time ago. How is that possible? Well, you could connect to a GraphQL endpoint with ColdFusion the way it was before and currently is. With 2021, you can use CF-HTTP to hit an endpoint in a very particular way. You have to send headers and bodies in a very particular way, and you can send the the actual query, the GraphQL query, if you set it up as a variable and pass it in. Now, limitations to that. You have to escape a whole bunch of stuff. It does not allow you to do the native GraphQL format, which I'll show you in a second. You can't use fragments. You can't use subscriptions. None of that stuff works. So that's sort of what we're adding to it. So to give you an idea, this is what the old version would look like. So here I'm actually hitting a GraphQL endpoint at Airtable that's been exposed using a product called BaseQL. So BaseQL takes the Airtable API, which is a RESTful API, and they overlay it, and they automatically generate a schema, which makes me think I need to go and buy them or something, because it's a really neat technology, and then exposes that as a GraphQL endpoint for you to go ahead and mutate against or query against. So this is how you do it the old way. This is how you would do it the new way. And this is a little bit confusing here, because what you're seeing here is raw native GQL queries, and I have 3 of them set up because I was playing with something and I was playing with different ways of returning data. So I've got GQL1, GQL2, and GQL3, and you'll notice this query here looks very different from up here, right? Like this, the query part is in quotes, right? It's just very, very different. And that's sort of the limitation of the old version, is if you needed to do more than one set of quotes, the whole thing fell apart. You weren't able to do it. But in here, you can just create it here. You can also, by the way, have a text file with your queries in them and load them dynamically into your code from the server. So that's an alternative way of doing it instead of doing it in line. And then what you'll do here is you will do GQL client.fetch response, and then pass in your query. And then here's where you would put parameters. I've actually asked the engineers, I don't know if this will go in. I've asked for this second overload to be removed, because I think it's kind of silly to have to pass in a blank set of parameters, but whatever. It may or may not get removed. And then now you've got a response, and the way that looks is like that. So that is the data that you get back. So as you can see, it's JSON, and it is returned, by the way, inside of a struct. So this is another difference, by the way, between doing it in CF-HTTP and using the GraphQL client that we're putting into CF 2023, is you will actually get all of this data, so you can get a little bit of, you can see how long the query took, all that. You can see when it was executed. You can see what the query was. I also asked, and hopefully this gets into beta, for them to have an alternate method of sending a GQL query where you just get the data, right? So that you don't have to do anything funky like, do response.data.data, which is what you have to do here. You have to like do a little bit of deserialization to get it back out to the way that you want it. So, I'm lazy. I don't want to do that. So yeah, so that's what it looks like. So you can kind of see it's actually kind of awesome, because now you can plug this in, by the way, into something like data tables and have just a table that's dynamically generated by a GraphQL query with really not very much work from you as a developer at all. You don't have to loop through it or do anything like that unless you want to. You can, of course, take that and do whatever the heck you want with it. Okay, so I think I'm getting kind of a little short on time. Yeah, so I think I'm good. I think I am done with anything. Questions?
So with the GraphQL stuff, one of the things I find myself doing a lot is, particularly the main place I use GraphQL is interacting with Azure services, or particularly Office 365 services or things like that. And the authentication stuff that they have is near impossible.
Are you talking about
different?
You doing OAuth using Graph API? Is that
yeah,
what
you
you're
have
doing?
to do the OAuth, and then there's, particularly if they do their own SAML thing, you have to do like 3 hops to get everything and all that. Are you going to build it so you can plug in an authentication scheme into the GraphQL calls, or is that something you're going to have to kind of end up rolling your own?
That's a really, really good question. And I don't have an answer off the top of my head. I know we have the ability to create a SAML object to authenticate against, and that's going to be in the administrator. And theoretically, you should be able to pass that OAuth object into your Graph API call and have it authenticate, theoretically. But I don't know if we've actually tried that out and tested it. That actually also would be a really nice. We had this issue late last year and early this year where open authentication, like clear text, not clear text, but basic authentication for Microsoft Mail products went kaboom. They removed it, and some CF Mail stuff stopped working. But of course, their Graph API stuff still worked, and so this would actually be an alternative. And we added in the ability you can patch your CF server now to use OAuth with these products. But if you wanted to use the Graph API, this could be potentially a replacement for that. So I will ask. In fact, I've got a core meeting. I have the engineers showing up virtually at my house in about 4 hours. So I will ask and see
and that's
if
actually
we've
like
done that.
the similar use case. I had to we moved off of on-prem Exchange to, in the cloud O365. And in my case, one of the things I keep on having to do is interact with Exchange mailboxes, for example.
Yeah,
So Microsoft initially just disabled basic auth using IMAP and all that stuff, but
right.
now they've even gone as far as, the only way you can, subscribe to mail or to, insert things into the mailbox and all that stuff is actually with GraphQL. And
Yeah.
so that's my my use case that I use all the time.
And that's actually a really good point too. That and I truly believe we are going to continue to see companies going that way, just because of how powerful GraphQL is for changing things around like that. I mean, like it provides an interface that saves them kind of a lot of headaches. Unfortunately, it puts the headaches on our side. And so by adding that in there, yeah, I mean that will give you the capability of doing that like natively just inside of your CF. So I mean, I'm gonna ask, and if they say no, I'm gonna say yes, make it so, please, because that's a very common use case and becoming more common as people, leverage Office 365. Yeah, like Microsoft is not going away from Graph API in Office 365, like the other way. Every product they come out with now is going to be powered by that system. So the more that we support it, the better. So really good question. Thank you. Any more questions?
I'm going to bring up something. Hope it's not a sore subject for you, but where is Lambda? It was pulled out of the last beta, and we never heard of it again.
Thank you for mentioning that. So
I think it was a coding problem. It was a marketing deciding how to charge for it problem, right?
Sort of. It was more an issue with Amazon and Adobe not playing well together necessarily. We needed to build a stronger relationship than we did, and there was a lot of shuffling inside of, well, mostly Amazon, some shuffling inside of Adobe. Those relationships went away, and we were unable to have the technical like insight into their systems for us to be able to release it. So, where are we today? Well, today, this Friday, I am meeting with an AWS representative to discuss how we're going to make this happen. So it's actually being actively worked on. We want Lambda to become a thing, in addition to other systems that could be billed hourly, minutely, etc. inside of AWS. So I don't have anything for you today, but I can tell you it's on my radar, and I am actively, like, literally going to lunch with people from Amazon to try and get it done, because we're rebuilding those relationships. And to be fair, like, it's a powerful ability. You guys should have it. That's my take on it.
I agree, and I can privately send you a name of somebody who is a senior engineer of Amazon AWS in Australia that is pro CF guy, used to do a lot of CF and has worked with me on some stuff, did a meeting for us. And if there's anything he can do from his level, which is way down from the very, very top, to advocate for this, I think he'd be willing to do it.
Is it Mr. Kukiel?
Yes.
Oh yeah, no, me and Kukiel are like this. We're buds.
Okay.
And he is a very big advocate. He actually still to this day sends me a DM every couple of weeks about like Lambda. And you know, I really, yes, no, he has been a tireless advocate for Lambda, and he has done some incredibly ridiculously cool stuff with ColdFusion. By the way, he's run it on ARM. I don't know if you guys know, like he's used the the native ARM servers that Amazon has, and somehow he tried to explain it to me. He lost me at like sentence 2, but he actually got ColdFusion running on their ARM servers, which, I told my engineers that, and they're like, "What? How the bleep did he do that?" But anyway, so Lambda is, I don't want to say it's coming, but it's not out of, we didn't like kill it outright. It's still on my radar. By the way, also the current director of product that's overseeing like engineering and product for CF is also interested in getting something that works, because again, it's a very powerful, useful feature. And so yeah, I'm hoping that it can come out. Luckily, the nice thing about it is I don't think it's going to require a release of ColdFusion when we get it running. Like, I think we'll just be able to say, hey, you can now use it. Go ahead and go over here, and it'll be selectable as, as one of the languages, or you'll be able to upload something like Fuseless or something like that. Like we'll be able to kind of midline get you into it. Hopefully you won't have to wait for something like CF 2025 or 2027 or something like that, because that would be silly.
That's good news.
Yeah. Yep. I want to use it.
Right. I got another question for you. Actually, I got a couple more I could, but I want to hog it. Are there any changes to the server licensing in the cloud?
See if this has gone live yet. So we are rewriting our EULA, and I don't think it's live yet, and I don't have the details to share, unfortunately, because it's like people out of my pay grade doing it. But yes, and my ask of them has been to simplify the damn thing and make it so that you don't have to work at Adobe to understand what the hell you're looking at, and to make it clear what's allowable and where you can run it. So if they listen to me, debatable, then hopefully that will be coming out, and that will come out probably at the same time. Like we won't hear about it because it needs to go through legal, it needs to go through blah blah blah, but it is being worked on, and it is going to change. I just don't have the details of how it's going to change. Hopefully modernization, because the old one was stuck in 1997. Like, if you're installing this on NT on a 486 DX, this is how many cores you can use. Hopefully they've gone away from that, but I don't know.
I'd like to advocate for them allowing, I don't know if it's still called standard or the basic version in the cloud, and maybe you limit it to 2 instances on EC2, and after that you got to go to enterprise, because as a solo entrepreneur, a small guy, standard would do it for me.
And we may have things coming for you, Rick. Okay. So we still recording?
Yep. We don't have to.
Why don't
we can hold that question until the end. How about that?
There you go. Yeah. I can go over a few things sort of without it being on record. But you said you had another question other than the licensing one though too?
I will second what Nick said about OAuth. There's a lot of uses for OAuth, and it'd be nice to have. And it's CF simple as opposed to trying to do it in JavaScript with some of these libraries.
Yeah.
And I'd also suggest that they come up with some sort of training program for this new admin console. I don't expect you to send an engineer out to put a class on for people and take them out for a steak dinner because you don't have Microsoft's money.
Nope.
But if you could point them toward a class where they could go for a couple hours online and learn everything about it with somebody that speaks their language, it'd take you a very long ways in large organizations like Michigan State or Ford Motor or whatever. Just saying, interacting with people like that.
We will be. You're talking about CCS.
Yeah.
So we will probably be having workshops, like literal workshops for these things, because it's kind of a whole new concept in CF. Like we haven't had something like that really from Adobe. I mean, you could argue things like command box and stuff allow you to do control of stuff programmatically, but we haven't had it in the administrator before. And so it's very new and it's very powerful. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we're almost certainly going to have, those free courses like Brian does every few months, right? Where he does like the API manager and he does a lot of that. So we're going to have things like that. And then probably, maybe that's something I need to talk to Kishore about tomorrow is having a workshop teaching people how to use the CCS at Summit. So you could come to Summit and sit for a day, learn how to use the OAuth SSO stuff, the SAML and stuff, and how to use the CCS and all that type of thing. Stuff that isn't language specific like GraphQL, just to get your DevOps people out of the basement. Send them to Vegas. Actually, that might be a bad idea. So Charlie had a question. Let me read that. So the GraphQL stuff is in Alpha 2, not Alpha 1, out right now. Any time frame on Alpha 2, or is that technically under NDA? Alpha 2 is out right now for Windows. You could go get it right now. And I thought I posted that in Slack. We don't have the quick start guide yet. I need to go bug the docs team about that. They had someone that came up sick, so that's delayed. But if you know what you're doing, generally speaking, with GraphQL, you can use it. I can also send some example code if you want to try that out. So it's available. If you are part of the alpha, you can go and get it. It's on the downloads page. So check it out.
So I had a question about the CCS piece.
Yeah.
There's already a growing community of storing and manipulating and all that type of stuff, configurations programmatically, like CF config. There's a push over on the Lucy side for similar type things, and a lot of that has to do with how we're, deploying like Docker images and all that type of stuff. Do you see the ability, or do you see CCS kind of playing in that realm too, maybe being able to consume CF config configurations or making things a little more interchangeable?
Yeah, keep in mind, so this iteration of CCS is just the beginning. So my sort of vision for this product, and it was too big for one version, essentially. Like, you should have seen the spec that I threw at the engineers. They almost threw me out of the building. My vision eventually is for this to allow you to do things like set up Docker, like send a Docker image to to a container, to control Docker to the degree that you can programmatically, right? To spin up a new, like, this is something that I mean, people have been asking us for this for so long. Just the ability to spin up a temporary ColdFusion server the way that you can with command box. like programmatically from a UI, right? Like it shouldn't be that hard to do that. And this will allow us to do something like that, to say, okay, go ahead and start a server with these configuration settings and just spin it up. Boom, have it running, test something out. Maybe you want to test, oh, would this have worked on 2018? Or will this work in 2023 and you're on 2021, you want to change the version of the software. It'd be nice to be able to do that quickly, easily, and most importantly, sort of like non-destructively. Yes, and Charlie says the tool works not just with CF 2020, but also past versions. That's really important because the reality of the situation is, like, people keep their older versions. Sometimes they keep them actually past when they should, right? And support has sort of lapsed, but they're not, they're not interested in updating it. They don't need to, maybe, but they still need to control it. They still need to have control of their systems and their environments. And so that is something about the system. So yeah, I mean, for the most part, and I would love if you have ideas about how you'd like to see that work. I'd love to get that feedback from you and get that, because I mean, this is still, it's kind of an open book a little bit still. Like we're still imagining the future of this feature, and we want it to be something that is going to be sort of the way you do ColdFusion in the future, in a safe way, right? Like I hear so many people just tell me, CF gives them heartburn. Like whenever we say a new patch is coming out, everyone's heart goes into their throat. Right? All the DevOps people start sharpening their knives, right? Because like suddenly, like what's going to break this time? Well, this will help alleviate some of that, right? Obviously, on our side, we need to make sure that we don't break stuff as much. But if it's less of a bear, if it's less of a difficulty, more people will use it and they'll feel better about upgrading. And for the most part, it'll be safer. They'll get to use all the new features, I'm excited about that. I want people to use the cool new stuff necessarily. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
So another comment I wanted to make too, as these new features come out and all that type of stuff, the official documentation ends up on the Adobe documentation sites and all that stuff. And
right,
honestly, stuff's not easy to find there anymore. A couple of website revs back there, and I know you don't control the Adobe site and all that stuff, but simple things like just doing breadcrumbs back to like the table of contents and all that type of stuff. In our conversation with ORM, Adobe's documentation on ORM is some of the more accurate that's out there. And constantly I'm going to Google, search for the ORM, I'll find the one page, but then I need to refer to one page back and you can't get to that stuff. Is there?
Yes. So Charlie Earhart, who's here, had a very long, very fruitful conversation with me and one of the engineers at one of our recent alpha events, and he showed me things that sort of turned my hair white. I colored it back, as you can see, but those issues are being addressed. Let me just put it that way. There was a little bit of a come to Jesus moment internally when I got the full sort of idea of what was really wrong with the docs, beyond maybe some of the examples not being good or there being a few mistakes. Like Charlie really exposed and surfaced some of the more core architectural issues that underlie the thing, and I sent out a very scathing email to the leadership and essentially said, listen, this is not acceptable. Like we need to so this has been put as a critical item in our stack, and we've got engineers assigned to it. We're doing research to see how we can get around, because some of the issues are actually architectural issues with the system that Adobe put in place, which is not an excuse, but it's we need to find a way around that limitation, because otherwise there's no way to get some of the depth back in there, and there's no way to kind of backlink the stuff that's supposed to be backlinked out to the content. We need to find a way around that, and we need to find a way to do it for thousands of pages. Charlie, how many pages is in that CF11? Like, was it like 870 pages or something? There's a PDF, 3,000. Yeah, 3,000 pages of documentation, of which probably a third do not show up in the official help-ex stuff. Not due to the fact that they're not applicable anymore or anything like that, simply because the system does not have the architectural capacity to hold data of that depth. So yes, it's being worked on. I was a little bit blown aside and blown asunder when I realized the depth of it. And being like a docs guy myself, like I was a technical writer, like it's pretty near and dear to me. I was really amazed. Yeah, go ahead.
And I was kind of picking at a scab a little bit on that one there, because I was responsible for the Adobe Flex documentation for a long time on that CMS, and it still isn't any better. So
yeah, no, and that system, I mean, again, I don't really know, like I don't have visibility internally into what system is underneath it and how often it's updated. And Charlie says there's 2,080 pages in the CF11 developer guide. And that was the last version where we got PDFs. And that's actually another thing that I've suggested to the team, is this idea that online docs are good. They're fine, right? Like you can use them if they're done right. But it might actually be nice to have a PDF, like we had in the old days, like one source to go through.
And the nice thing about PDF is it survives a little bit longer. So, when they make a content or architectural change to the site, like you can go back to that PDF and still find the content, because it's the current site, it's interesting because it is discoverable, but it's not really easy to navigate. And that's where, you start losing, some of the taxonomy, some of those, some of the new features and things like that, unless people are searching for them, they won't find it.
Yeah, exactly. And that team is pretty lean too, and it's a lot for them to sort of handle. And so I think that we've kind of become a victim of the complexity again of what CF is. And I mean, even for me, like I'll go to CF Docs occasionally for samples. I'll be honest, I do that. Like I'll usually go to HelpX first, but if I don't find what I'm looking for, I'll go to CF Docs and see if there's a better example, see if someone wrote something in script. There's a fun little story. We're kind of over time, but when I was asked to do some presentations on DDX. If you're familiar with DDX, it's the lifecycle engine inside of ColdFusion. You can do things like merging PDF documents, things like that. So I was asked to sort of get up to speed on that, and do some talks about it, write some articles about it. And I decided, well, let's be modern. Let's do all the examples in CF script. Guess how much CF script was on the internet having to do with DDX? Goose egg. 0. There was not a single line of CF script anywhere on the internet having to do with DDX. It didn't exist. So I literally had to figure it out myself and write that stuff. And it still hasn't been added back to the docs. I sent over the examples for them to do CF script versions of the examples, and it still hasn't been added. So it just kind of goes to show there's just this huge stack of work that they're trying to do over there. And I think it's like a couple guys. It's like Surov, and I think he's got 1 or 2 folks also from the support team that do some writing. So it's tough, but again, that's no excuse. We should be putting out quality documentation, because it makes it really stupid and bad for our developers if we don't have that. Developer experience should be very important. Any other questions?
So I guess I'll kind of end the public portion with a kind of a pet peeve. I deal a lot with the Docker and you know, Cade and all that type of stuff. And one of the things that's been pretty annoying, which I don't really know if that's been addressed or is being addressed in this latest version, is the licensing portion. So you have, you know, you can spin up a Docker image with CF and all that type of stuff, but you then have to go to the CF administrator to put in the license code.
Oh, yeah.
Which kind of breaks how Docker works. You know, that was never available as an environment variable or, you know, push with a config or things like that. I'm assuming CCS is going to help that in a piece, but
yeah,
is that...
So Charlie says there's an environmental variable for the CF Docker images now. So
okay.
Yeah. But it's a good point. And the licensing portion also is something that they're trying to, like, I'm pretty sure somewhere in the license it says something about Docker, maybe not, but it's sort of been understood that you can spin up N number with one license or whatever that is. I think it's like 7.
It's they're technically, it is the number of instances, but the current licensing also says number of CPUs under the hood, which kind of negates that. So
yeah, and again, so yeah, this whole idea of like CPUs versus whatever, and I've been trying to explain this to these guys, like one CPU, like if I were to license ColdFusion on, you see this little box back here, this is my home machine. If I were to license ColdFusion on that, it would be $70,000. Because it's got like 36 CPUs, right? It's got 36 cores, and they're going by cores, right? So it's a very, it's not a modernized approach to licensing necessarily, and that's what they're working on. As I mentioned before, the EULA is being worked on to try to modernize it, to try to make it so that it works in a slightly better, more modern way and doesn't run into these little silly weird things. Because who knows, the next, you know, right now we're stuffing as many cores as we possibly can in every single CPU, but who knows, maybe somebody will come up with a way to make one core incredibly powerful, and then you'll be able to run everything on one core, right? Like it could potentially even harm us from a financial standpoint. Who knows? I don't know. It's just not a good way, in my opinion, to do things. But again, I'm not in charge of that stuff, and maybe that's a good thing because I drink way more than I do already. Oh. Speaking of which, it's about 1:15. So anybody else have any? Yeah.
Yeah, if anybody has a question, now's the time to ask it. If not, we'll turn the recording off. And Randy, you got a question?
No, Nick already asked all the good ones. Like you said, picking out a scab, especially when you start talking about those cores and everything and the licensing. Yeah, you talk about something to piss somebody off. That's it right there.
Okay. Okay, well then I guess we can turn off the recording, Nick.